Hello, everybody. Welcome to part 3 of the Destination Imagination Team Manager Training. I hope everybody on the line had a good holiday, maybe some productive DI meetings, maybe just some good time away. Regardless, it is now January and we're back to work. So let's get right to it, if you will. So what are we covering today? We're going to do just a real quick recap on a couple of things that I think are valuable to revisit from some of the prior trainings. Won't spend too much time there, but go over a couple of things there. Talk about where your team's at today. You may think you're in a boat all by yourself, but we're all probably sitting right next to you there. So hopefully that'll, help you feel a little bit better. We'll talk a little bit about something we like to call proof of concept, and hopefully some additional tools around that to kind of help you kickstart the team moving along, keep them from just swirling around in theory and idea and start to move forward. Talk a little bit about increasing your efficiency as we go across these next few weeks. The days and the hours become more and more precious, and so obviously you want to make good use of them, so hopefully we can give you a few tips on how to do that. And then we'll talk a little bit about bringing it all together as you move through January and into February and your tournament is very near. Obviously you're going to want to be able to do a little bit different at that point to prepare them and get them ready to go to tournament. So we'll talk a little bit about that tonight as well. Once again, as we go through everything, if you've got questions, a real good way to do it is just to go ahead and type them into the your screen there on the right. You can send them just to organizers and panelists, and that'll come to Dick, and then we'll take a couple breaks as we go through things and cover those things as well. So on we go. So a little bit of review here, but we'll talk about solving the challenge. And this is definitely applicable for anybody's challenge, whether you're doing the technical challenge, you're doing improv, you're doing any of them. It really is kind of the same process. And so this is something that you want to pay attention to as you're trying to solve particular problems within your challenge, because every challenge obviously is layered and has lots of different pieces to it and different things you're going to have to figure out. How are you going to make a costume? How are you going to build a machine? How are you going to create something, et cetera, et cetera. And so try and make sure that they go through this. And it is definitely not a linear equation. I know in the original training there's lots of arrows everywhere because sometimes you'll go straight from idea to details, back to research, concepts, creation, doesn't work, go back to idea. Sometimes it goes straight down the line. But you want to kind of keep them moving through these things and pushing the team to drive themselves along. So if they have an idea, okay, what do you need to know about that idea? Do you know those things already? So you're going to have to probably go do some research. Where should we research? Is it something we can find online to read about and learn about, or is it something we need experts? So that will help us to develop the best concept. I find that if you go idea to concepts to details without the research, you're probably going to wind up back at research anyway. So you might as well do it up front. It tends to make things better. I know I've had an engineer one time tell me if you're working crazy hard, you're probably not doing something right. So you might want to stop and think about what you're doing before you continue on and see if you can maybe make it simpler. A lot of times the elegant, simple solution is going to be the most successful one versus the ones that are incredibly complicated. The incredibly complicated ones are always tougher to put together. They tend to break more often. So definitely make sure you're kind of thinking through that, what's going to really work well, and so you can move through these things a little cleaner and hopefully start to get into that creation stage, which really is the most fun part about this. The other thing I wanted to just revisit and remind people, because this is, I think, a time of the year where everybody really starts to, kind of develop their skits and all of that. You do that same sort of ideas, research, create, you kind of move through that same steps and processes typically, whether you're building props or you're building machines or you're creating skits. But really a couple of things that you want to make sure the kids are thinking about as they're going through the skit creation is you want it to be unusual, you want it to be interesting, you want it to be a great story. So make sure that they're starting with that. Like, what are you trying to tell them here? What's the point of this story? Why is it a great story? And make sure they're thinking through that, because as they think through that, they'll put in their details and they'll build things that are interesting. also help them at this point to try and make things as clear as possible, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we get to the bottom here, but just remember, everybody else has only seen this skit one time. Those appraisers are only going to see it one time. They're going to see it the time at the tournament. And so if it's not a great story, if it's not interesting, if it doesn't kind of hold their interest, it's going to be tougher for them to really get engaged and follow, and it just makes it so much more fun for everyone to kind of watch, and as they're telling a really good story. So make sure they're starting with that. What's your story about? Get them excited about that piece. And then help them sort of build into the basic plot. So, you've probably got a protagonist, you've got an antagonist, you've got a story arc, there's some sort of conflict, there's a resolution. Sort of help them sort of think through that. What are those components that you're building into here? Who is the hero? Who's the bad guy? What's the story going through? Where's the conflict? Each one of these challenges has its own particulars that it has to be fulfilled there. So make sure they're kind of thinking through that. And then, help them sort of build from that basic into, okay, what are our scenes that you want to do? How do you want to tell these things? What's important in each scene? I like to have my team sort of make a list and figure it out before they really get into the hard details about it, is what are the 3 things you're trying to convey in each scene? What's the point of the scene? And it will tend to make it a much cleaner story. It'll tend to have it flow much more easily, nicer to follow, a little less confusing, because we know that these kids come up with some crazy storylines that are amazing. But you can come up with those crazy, amazing, bizarre, strange things and tell them in a way that's very interesting to watch and easy to follow along, so you don't get overly confused in the story. So help them through that, because the clearer it is, like I said, the more fun it'll be for the audience to watch. And that's invigorating when the audience is engaged and the audience is watching and they're excited to see it and they understand what's happening. That's really cool. If the story gets a little bit sideways and it's not clear what's happening, audience will get a little confused. The kids feel that. So help them kind of make it fun and clean and clear. It'll be so much better. Once they get to that point and they've sort of built their signposts and they know where they're going with the story, then bring in those details, bring in the kind of the flavor of the story, the details of the characters. Are there any backstories? Is there things that they want to kind of get across, those types of things? And then once you've sort of got it front to back and they've run through it a few times and they're starting, certainly haven't mastered it by that point at any point, but, then kind of take a few minutes and sort of pull it back apart and say, are we achieving everything? Have we changed some of the directive? Do we want to do anything different here? And they'll see that. They'll understand. You can certainly have them do it, and you can videotape them and have them watch it if you want. That's another great way to do it, is have them see it and see what they're projecting to people, before you really finalize that skit. It's easier to change it before they know it front to back. So definitely spend a little bit of time in that, in developing the story. It'll make it such a stronger presentation as you move through things, for sure. So the last thing that I wanted to revisit here is just resolving team conflict. This obviously is something hopefully most of you have learned how to kind of deal with within your team. Maybe you have, maybe you haven't. Sometimes it's something you fight all year. Sometimes the kids kind of figure it out. But make sure that you're continually trying to work through this. Hopefully you've developed a couple of sort of coping mechanisms, whether it's an arbitrary way to decide it, coin flip, team votes, those kinds of things. But definitely try and help them as they get into these conflicts. You want to let them resolve them, but you also need to recognize when the problem is getting beyond just that single problem, and it's starting to affect the dynamic of the team, because then it's a lot less fun for them to be around. They feel that tension just like you do. So make sure you're acknowledging that, making sure you're kind of getting to the bottom of it. Is it really just, I want purple and she wants green, or is it something else where there's other things that are spilling over? And make sure you're kind of talking through it and acknowledging it. It seems to be easier to work through things when everybody's talking about it. But definitely, keep using those conflict resolution skills, keep teaching them those things, so hopefully they can get through the little discussions on their own, and you only have to get involved when there's really big things, that there's deadlocks and things like that. So definitely kind of keep working on that, though. It's an important thing to pay attention to, and and not let it spill over into sort of permanent team issue, that kind of thing. So before I jump into the new stuff, is there anybody has questions about anything that we've covered in the past, anything around those things I just talked about? Any questions out there, Dick?
Yes, there is one here. One kid is loud and want the team to follow their ideas. They criticize what others do.
So, not knowing obviously how old these kids are, imagine when you run into that kind of dynamic, it's typically probably some elementary kids, maybe some younger kids. It is probably the toughest personality issue that you have is when you have one kid that's really domineering. And it's a very careful line because you want to make sure that they're respecting everybody else's ideas. But you don't want to just crush them. You don't want to just tell them, stop talking, you're talking over the top of everyone else needs a chance. What you probably want to maybe do, a couple things that you could suggest is, if you're doing some idea generation, making sure that you're going around in a circle in the group and you make sure that person goes last, so everybody else gets a chance to talk. Or you can, have somebody else come up with ideas and then have that sort of domineering personality come up with something positive about it. So, you kind of make it a group dynamic where it's going around and around, but you can also say, so what do you think about that? What do you like about it? What's good about it? And force them into some of that positive reinforcement versus that attack, because that can be, just it's hard. I get it, because then the other kids don't want to talk, and it can be a real bad thing. So I would say just make sure that you are not allowing that individual to run the meeting. Keep in mind it's their team, but you're there to help facilitate, and you're there to kind of keep that sort of order from getting out of control. Not a great answer, I know, and that's kind of an individual situation where you want to kind of create those positive reinforcements where the rest of the team feels comfortable in voicing their ideas and make sure that those other folks get heard.
Okay, the next question. Would it be interference to suggest that they script out their performance?
I don't believe, Dick, unless you feel differently, I think if you're just basically giving them a tip, and that's really more in process. So, you could say some teams maybe make it easier to write out their script. Some don't. Honestly, I've got teams that have never written out their scripts ever. They find it easier just to practice it and go over it and develop the lines as they go. But other teams find those scripts they're indispensable. You have to have them. So it's definitely something that you're within range to go ahead and suggest that as a technique, for sure.
Yeah, I look at it as just, you can teach them how to use a saw, you can teach them how to use a screwdriver. Why can't you teach them how to use a script? And that's not interference.
Absolutely.
And the next question, how do I let other kids' ideas shine?
So when you've got one kid who's maybe real quiet, real shy, those types of things, or you've got somebody who's got that overly negative thing, we kind of get back to it and say, you maybe create a rule that, the first three things that you can say about an idea have to all be positive. And sometimes it can be really tough where a kid just won't talk, won't give their ideas. I think you have to gently push them, but you got to be careful not to. Some kids, it just takes them a long time. I've had kids on my teams where they'll go a whole year and really not contribute a lot of ideas and things like that, and you just have to keep working with them. I think the other thing that you can also do, and you have to be careful when you're in idea generation, because you don't want to project your own, positivity around an idea, but as they're doing things and they're working and, they're sort of talking or they're doing things, is to really focus on reinforcing all the little positive things that person does. You're just really building their confidence. And then as they're going to become more confident, they're going to talk more. You do have to be really careful, though, about as they're generating ideas, and you go, that's a great idea, because then all of a sudden the other kids are going to just latch onto that, and they're going to follow your lead to the idea versus their lead to the idea.
Okay, that same person who asked about the one person that was sort of dominating, remember you asked that question about they criticize. She responded back and said that group was a group of 8-year-olds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you're dealing with the younger kids, it's definitely something that you need to really stay engaged in managing the dynamic of the interaction, how the kids are talking to each other, what they're saying to each other, encouraging the positive feedback between the team members. That's important. And also, if you've got kids that are, becoming domineering with a lot of negativity, I say it's well within your range to kind of point it out to the whole team. Look, we're looking for positive things here. We're looking for what you like about it. So let's focus on those things. And then if it becomes a real problem, I would suggest, taking it offline, talking to that kid away from the team. And if they continue to do it, you can always involve a parent if you have to. I've done it before. I don't like doing it because I really feel like it's the team and you that are kind of engaging. But if you've got a kid that's either just not into it, doesn't like it, real negative, it's certainly a tool at your disposal.
Okay, the next question is from Brandy, and she has a Rising Star team. She has any suggestions for Rising Star teams and keeping them focused with a story item, focused on time, and tell and writing the story.
So I would say with the Rising Star teams, obviously you've got to bite off much smaller chunks at a time. You're going to know the attention span of your kids. If you've got mostly kindergartners, it's going to be that much harder versus, first or second graders, just because, you get big jumps in maturity over those years. So I would just suggest maybe breaking it up into really, really small pieces, and having them attack it, in chunks like that. I don't know if that's sort of the answer that you're looking for, but you definitely want to kind of get them attacking in like quick hits. The other thing, and I don't know if you're doing this or not, but you should be scribing for them. And that honestly goes for just about any age group. You are certainly allowed to. It's not interference for you to scribe the ideas as they get, sort of put out onto the table. When they're up on a board or a big piece of paper, it's a lot easier for the teams to focus on it because it's up there, and they're going to forget what they said 3 seconds ago. So if you've got it all written down and they're looking for something, you can just flip to it and go, okay, here were all the ideas you just spit out. Was it up here? Did you see it? Those types of things. So I think that probably helps a little bit as well, and really helping them kind of focus the number of ideas down. So, for those kids, they're going to have tons and tons of ideas, but, then you got to kind of help them along with that process to sort of whittle things down so they can get focused on just one idea. All right, Dick. So I think hopefully that covers it, so we can kind of move on to the new stuff, because I don't want to.
Okay, we just have one more here.
All right.
One kid is very shy and doesn't participate much. This is a 7th grade team.
Okay. I would say middle schoolers, you can be a little bit more forceful with bringing them out. I think you're going to know how strongly you can do that because you have the kids there, you see the dynamics. But, when I've had newer kids come into the group who are very shy, I try and set the stage, before they get into the group, or, as they get to the meetings, and say, hey, look, I'm looking for more from you today. So I really want you to try and come up with some ideas. And also, if you have some kids on the team who have done it, or maybe some of the kids that are, much less shy, have them help you. you know, and have them be super encouraging. And I don't think there's anything wrong with, you know, if Bobby's really shy, but you have, you know, Jane on the other side of the table, who you know is kind of a natural leader, is to help, you know, tell Jane, say, look, we're really trying to get some more out of Bobby today. Would you please make sure that you're just a little extra positive when he talks? And then get him to come up with an idea. And sometimes you're going to sort of not stop the meeting, but you're going to spend a little extra time, you know, going around the table. And, you know, it's like, look, everybody's coming up with an idea here. And don't make that person go first, but don't let them go last, because if they go last, you know, all the good ideas are taken. So kind of stick them in the middle of the circle, if you will, you know, maybe third or something like that, so they've got an idea so they're not starting this conversation, but then they're engaged in it. And then definitely, you know, make sure that people are positively reinforcing it. Or if you're talking through something and you know that Bobby had an example that kind of fits in, you can say, you know, like Bobby said. Like, you guys heard what Bobby said, right? Yeah. So that's kind of what you're looking at right here, right? You know, like if two people have the same idea, but they're focusing on one instead of the other, and then go to the one that's shy and you know, have it and make them think it's his idea. Just any of those things that you can do are going to help them. And honestly, you're not going to find the fix-all. It's going to be just a process over time. You're just going to positively reinforce their engagement and also help them start to understand that it's okay to come up with an idea that's wrong, you know, quote unquote wrong, or one that the team doesn't like, or one that won't work. Those are perfectly okay things. You have to constantly reinforce that there's a sliver of awesomeness in every single idea that's going to spit out of your mouth. So spit it out of your mouth. The team needs it. We need you to come up with that idea. We can't be good without it. We need your help. You know, you have to be very impassioned with them and help them understand that we really care what you say, because you're just as important as everybody else at this table. So come forth with that stuff, and you just got to sort of slowly pull it out of them. They'll get to it. They'll get there. I promise. It may not be night to day, but it'll be night to dawn at least. And, you know, you'll start to see the glimmering of inspiration and confidence. And, you know, that's just trying to progress. Just trying to get them to get a little bit better each week. That's all you can hope for.
Okay, that covers all the questions.
All right, great. All right, so let's get on to the new stuff. I know everyone out there has that look on their face right now because you're that excited to hear what's new. So first off, let's talk about this one. So where is your team today? I can tell you without a doubt, unequivocally, I've been doing this this is my 10th year as a team manager, and this is where my team is today. We are just barely hanging on. There's no way we're going to get done by the tournament. We have too much to do. We have not done enough. Oh my gosh, we don't have anything working yet. Nothing's built. We just got ideas. What the heck are we going to do? It's everybody. Every single team is like this. And if you are a team manager and you don't feel like this, you feel like you're ahead of the game, nicely done. Because most of us are just shaking our head going, how are we ever going to get this done? But everybody manages to get to the tournament, and whether it's what you meant or what you got done or whatever it is, everybody will get to the tournament and you'll have a good time. So just keep that in mind as we go here. You're not the only one that's panicked. You're not the only one that's trying to figure out how the heck are you going to get all this done. But that being said, depending on your tournament date, you've probably got 8 to 10 weeks to get this stuff done. So it is time to get going. So what that means is obviously there's going to be some hard work. The kids are going to have to spend some time. You're going to have to spend some time. But what does that mean? You don't want to just sort of fling effort at this. You want to make sure that it's effective. And so hopefully these will be some tips that can kind of help you get yourself in a place where you feel like the team's actually going to be able to move forward and they're going to be able to accomplish what they want to accomplish. So the first thing is getting organized. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this on the next slide and some things you can do to really get yourself organized. And this is not just getting the team organized, this is getting you organized, because you will project that organization onto the team, and a lot of things that you can do as a manager that will organize that are not interference will help the team be far more efficient. So we'll talk about that on the next slide. So The next thing is really to divide and conquer. So start to figure out, all of you have different numbers of kids on your teams. You might have 3, you might have 4, you might have 7. Whatever it is, as you start to figure out the tasks that need to get accomplished, to start to divide them up. Start to, have them assign themselves out, or help them figure out how to assign themselves out to things. You probably have a few folks that are really good at one thing and maybe not as good at another thing. And so maybe you want to sort of take those and pair them up and have them work on things, because you want them to be learning as they're going here, but you also want to be accomplishing things. So you don't want to set them up for failure by putting the kids that don't know anything about Project X in charge of Project X. So, you're going to know your team better than that, but definitely, have them start to split up and start to do things in manageable projects. This is where it becomes very helpful if you have parents that are willing to help you out, or if you have multiple team managers, you can start to sort of break them up. And obviously, while you're not doing the work, you can be looking over their shoulder and making sure they're doing the work, because we know that if you leave a group of 8-year-olds or 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds or 14-year-olds or 16-year-olds alone in a garage for an hour, you'll come back and there'll be 5 minutes worth of work done. So it's very helpful if you're just hanging out in the garage and, hey, what are you guys doing over there? You working, or are you eating, Kit Kats? Okay, we'll finish up the Kit Kats and get back to work. So definitely do that, because what you want to do is you want to create progress. You want them to be doing things. At the end of the meeting, you want things to be tangible that are there that weren't there at the beginning. That's important. Every meeting you have now, you need to sort of have goals that you're trying to get to. You're trying to accomplish. If it's a prop or a costume, we need to build this hat for our costume. Okay, how much of that hat can we get done today? Can we get all of it done today? If we can get all of that hat done today, that's unbelievable. So these 2 or 3 kids are working on that hat all day. That's all they're doing. So when they get to the end of the day, boom, there's a hat. It's up on the shelf. Look at that. Awesome. Check that off the list. That's good stuff. You want to constantly be creating progress over the next few weeks. It's important because it creates energy, it creates enthusiasm, it creates excitement. So look for those little wins every single time you meet. The other thing that you may need to do at this point, depending on which challenge you're doing, how technical you're getting, how hard you're trying to, how hard something is to kind of get it done, reach out for that help as a team manager. That may be a specialist, somebody who knows stuff about something. If the kids want to, make a costume and it's going to require somebody to sew, and you don't know anything about sewing, you probably don't want to take the time to learn how to sew now. You might want to reach out and see, does anybody know how to sew? Because you can take the couple of kids that are going to sew, send them over to that person's house, they can learn, and then that person can supervise them while they're doing it. It's divide and conquer. It's progress, specialists. If you're trying to build something and they want to wire something up with electricity, you don't know anything about electricity. Do you know an electrician? Do you know a mom or a dad that knows a lot about electricity, who's just handy around the house? Because most of these projects, they're not getting that crazy with their electricity. Or do you know people who just are real handy and just kind of know all that stuff? Give them a call. Have the kids come up with questions and call those people and talk to them. It's very rare you're going to run into an adult that doesn't want to help these kids with these projects. They're fascinated by it. Most of these adults love this stuff. And so, have the kids reach out and call and talk to people. If you need to sort of prep them up and give the person a call and go, look, these guys are calling, here's what they're doing, here's the project that they're doing, and here's what you got to be careful not to do. You can't tell them the answers, but answer their questions and things like that. And so then the kids can call and then they'll learn. It'll be great. We talked a lot about this, about, more supervision can be helpful, even if it's just another parent in the room. They don't have to be doing anything, just sort of supervising is great. Hanging out, that's always good. Those things are good. This one is kind of a random, let it out. This is important to make sure that this doesn't get too tense. You're letting it, just make sure that you at certain points are helping the kids by making sure they keep in mind that this is for fun, that it's stressful because you're trying to get stuff done, but this is supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be silly. It's supposed to be creative. And if you make it too much about the project and too much about getting it done, it won't be fun. It then turns into work, and these kids will have plenty of time to work later. Make sure they're having fun. Let it out. Sometimes it's okay. Just, you know what, guys? We're all going to go take a 10-minute break, and we're going to go just be silly or do something, whatever. We're going to go take 5 minutes and see who can make the stupidest animal noise, or whatever it is that you guys do that the kids like to do. I mean, every group's going to be different, but make sure you're doing that. Don't get this thing so wound up so tight that it's just like, so try and keep it as loose as you can, because it's for fun. All right. Nobody's going to, have their college application denied because their DI project didn't work. So don't get too serious about it. The last thing on here is look for basic functionality in whatever it is that you're building. The kids will have an ideal version of what they want to build, but make sure they also keep in mind that they just got to make it work sometimes. Sometimes it's going to be so complicated and they're going to make it so difficult to build that it may never work. So, at certain points, okay, is it good enough or is it not? Do you have to make it that much better, or will this function for now? We can always go back and we can always rebuild this if we have time, or we can always add to this if we have time. Make sure that they're getting the minimums going on these things so that, they don't embed a month into trying to make one little piece of it work when they really need that month to make other things work. So definitely kind of look for that, that basic functionality. It's really, really important. We like to call this in my teams proof of concept. So you've got an idea, let's just build it and see if it'll work. Sometimes that just means let's just slap it together and do the best we can, and if it works, great. If it looks like it's going to work and we need to rebuild, good. Because a lot of times, whether you're building a prop or you're building a costume or you're building a machine, there are construction or engineering problems embedded in everything that they will not foresee. And you probably won't foresee either. You'll be surprised a lot of times, I wouldn't have thought that would have been a problem. But if you don't start building it, you're never going to know. So definitely make sure that you're getting to that point as quickly as possible. So let's talk a little bit about this organization piece of it, because I think this is really important. And like I said, while you're not allowed to interfere in the creation of solutions, you're definitely encouraged to help them learn the process of creating those solutions. And that is along that entire continuum. So we talked about scribing. That's important. That's part of this organization. It helps them. It creates a record of what they're thinking about. It allows them to draw pictures along with it so they know what they're doing, so they can go back and revisit those things. So that's really important, but make sure you're involving the team in this. So this is not something you just take on by yourself and go, I'm an organized person, I'm going to get this organized. Help them understand what it is to be organized. Part of that is all about the preparation for each meeting. And a lot of that preparation will start from the meeting before. So, as you're getting towards the end of the meeting, maybe spend 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is what you need to sort of recap where things are at, and let's talk about what we want to accomplish next week or next meeting, whenever it is. Who's going to be doing what? Are there anything that needs to get taken away? Those kinds of things. So help them start to think about that from preparation's perspective, because preparation, is not just about, doing. You have to think. You have to sort of be strategic when you prepare. So that you're being as efficient as possible. So help them start to understand that, there's a process to this stuff. It doesn't just happen like magic. When you guys show up the next week and the area is ready and things are out, it doesn't happen by accident. It happens because somebody prepares. So help them with that. And really that is organization. It's creating those to-do lists. What are we going to try and accomplish the next time? Do we have all the materials that we need? Do we have the tools that we need? Do we have everything at the ready here? And if not, do we need to go get things? So that, when that meeting starts, you're ready to go. And then, kind of talk about these things. Help them start to think about that. How are you going to do this? All right, we need to build this hat. Okay, well, who's going to build the hat? Is it going to be, 1, 2, and 3, or are we going to do 4 and 5? Or is it just number one's like, I really think I know how to do this. I can probably just handle this. Is everybody okay if I just do it? And, sometimes that's okay too. Sometimes everybody's doing little projects and, all 5 or 6 of them are just working on one thing each, and that's great too. Every problem's going to be different. Sometimes you're building something, creating something that's going to need 4 or 5 of them to get it because it's going to be tricky. It's going to be a lot of thinking on your feet as you go. Or it might be something that's kind of big and they need people to hold it. Whatever it is, how are you going to do it? So that when you get to that meeting, you're not spending the first 20 minutes just trying to get things going. You already know what's going. One of the things that I find is really useful is I will put the checklist up on the wall of what they want to accomplish that day. And it's very fun for them because as they finish something, they get to go over there with the marker and cross it off. It creates that sense of progress. We're making progress. We're doing things here. We're moving along. This is good. And that becomes energizing, and then they get to the next one. And so things like that are going to be are typically pretty helpful. Keeps them organized. The last thing about this organization is you have to be on time and you have to be efficient. So there's time for work, there's time for play, there's time for silliness, there's time for seriousness. Make sure you're blending that all together. That whole on time thing, you may have a team that is just chronically late. If they're chronically late, make that meeting a half hour longer. If you know that you're going to lose that time, do things like that. Or, just send out emails and plead to the parents that, look, we got a lot to do. We really need everybody here, ready to go, on time. If some of these kids, hey, would you please make sure that they eat before they get here? I know I've got a couple that are growing that, if they haven't eaten a proper lunch or a proper dinner before they get here, they're a mess. They're listless. They're kind of out of it. They get aggravated. So, all of those things allow you to make better use of their time. And that's really what you're trying to do, is you're trying to create this maximization of the people hours you've got in front of you between now and the tournament, without it making it seem like you're driving hard labor here. So, a lot of this stuff is really just that strategic thinking ahead of time, trying to get prepared, trying to get organized so that when you get there, you're making good use of the time, and that will probably double your output versus just showing up. I know how it goes. You get home from work, you got a meeting at 6 o'clock. Oh my gosh, I got 20 minutes here. I don't even know I'll just deal with it when I get out there. And then the kids get there, and then the first 10 minutes is spent just hanging out, sort of wallowing around, and then the next 10 minutes is sort of getting things out and getting some tools out, things like that. Spend some time. Try and spend some time the night before if you can, or before the meeting. If they've identified these are the things we're doing today, and that requires cardboard and markers and glue, and they already know how they're doing the project, then get the stuff out and get it ready for them. Have it kind of help them kind of keep their areas clean. Little things like that will make a big difference. If they're not walking around looking for a tool or looking for a material, it'll save a lot of time and just keep them focused, because once they get unfocused, it's hard to bring them back. So definitely make sure that you're doing that. So that's one way you can do it. The other thing is that you're only going to stretch that time so far. So what else can you do to get yourself from point A to the tournament in a fashion that the team deems to be ready? And I will say that every team deems that point differently. Some teams are just happy to kind of get something together and get there. Some teams will be, much harder driven, and they want to do everything just right. And you know what? Both are great, and both are good. And it's up to the team to decide that, and you're going to help them through that. But you'll probably realize sometime in the next couple of weeks, darn it, we're going to need more than our regular meeting or regular meetings or whatever it is that you're doing. So how can you do that? So the first one is obvious: meet more often. Yeah, if time was endless and you didn't have a full-time job, no problem. I'll be here every day this week. Stop by and we'll get stuff done. But you could probably squeeze, can you squeeze a second meeting in a week? Yeah, probably. I know a lot of teams will do that this time of year, where if they're meeting on a weekday, they may find a Saturday morning or a Sunday afternoon or whatever time they can and get together for a second meeting, just to give them more time to get stuff done. Meet in smaller teams. This kind of gets to the next point, which is giving them homework. Definitely something that they can do at this point. If there's smaller projects that need to get done, they need to build X, and it's just going to take somebody some time to kind of cut some things out. Well, go ahead and send it home with one of them and say, okay, when you come back on Wednesday, make sure you have all that done, so that we can keep moving to the next piece. That's an important thing to, kind of keep doing that, moving along. Those smaller teams, one or two of them together, at somebody's house, you guys go get that done, bring it back in 3 days or whatever it is. Those are definitely certain things. We talked about the supervision expertise. I want to bring it up again. Just sometimes having somebody in the room is helpful. Having experts is even better. So if you feel like you've got something that they could use some expertise or some help on, have them come in. Especially if you don't know anything about the topic or you know very little about the topic, having a proper tool or having a proper material or having a proper fitting or whatever it is, hey, we're trying to connect these two materials. Well, you don't know and your kids don't know, but there may be the simplest material or simplest fitting that is exactly designed to do what you want it to do. And if your kids have identified, and we want to take A and we want to take B and we want to put them together and we want them to do this, and we don't know how to do this. Is there a material? Is there a fitting? If they're asking a question like that, it's okay for somebody to give them that answer. Yeah, if you go to Home Depot and you ask for this type of material, they'll have it. And then they can go and get it and bring it back, and then they can do it. So it's okay for them to get answers to their specific questions. That's not interference. There's lots of different things like that that my kids have learned along the years, because we have bumped our head 1,000 times on things, and then we get to somebody who, you go to Home Depot and you ask the question, and there's an expert there, and they tell you, and like, oh my gosh, wish we'd known this 3 weeks ago. That does it 100 times better, 100 times easier. It's more precise, and that's not going to break, versus what we were going to do will break every time. So definitely keep that kind of thing in mind. Talked about the homework, and honestly, just that organization. I want to just being hyper organized, having stuff ready for them. Honestly, they're going to be crazed and messy and all over the place. There's nothing wrong with kind of walking through the garage or the living room, and sort of helping them pick stuff up as they're going. It's like, oh, you got all this stuff. Why don't we put it over here in a pile? Keeping organized, and explain to them why those things matter. Help them with the process. Being organized can help you as you're doing these things. You'll be able to find stuff quicker, find stuff easier. Hey, is there anything else that you guys need? Are there tools that you're missing? Is there something you need? Kind of keep that stuff, drive that organizational piece. It's really important to do that. So, how much is too much? This is always a tough one. I think most of us run into it at some point as we get a few more weeks down the road here, probably 5 or 6 more weeks. You're into February, you only have 2 weeks left. You will need to help the team assess this as they're starting to get closer. And don't wait until the week before the tournament. As you get a couple of 3 weeks out, 4 weeks out, maybe stop and just have them analyze what they've got. What do they still need? Are there things in the challenge that are required that they haven't done yet? Okay, there are. So maybe we should focus on those things. Or maybe they don't care. Maybe they've got some things going, that they really want to focus on. So you definitely want to help them prioritize. So what projects are most important to your team's definition of success? And I put that word success in quotes because success means very different things to every single team. Some teams, success is what place they come in. And I think that most of the teams, that's part of what makes them successful or what they view as success. But I think a lot of teams don't view that as what's most important. I think some of them view it as we want to solve the challenge. Or some of them, we have this particular project, or maybe we have a side trip that's just so cool. Those kinds of things. So make sure that they're focusing on what success means, and that they're keeping that in mind as they're trying to kind of get to the finish line here. Also, what has the likelihood of reaching completion? Some things that maybe they bit off a little more than they can chew on something, and maybe it's time to take a step back and simplify. Or maybe it's just something that's taking so much longer than they thought it was going to be? And is that something that they should continue to pursue? Should they sort of cut it back? Maybe it's just some decorations on a prop, and it's just they wanted to do, they're making a cloud, or they're making, eagle's wings and whatever it is, and it's lots of little things, and it's just taking forever. Okay, so do we want to keep doing that? Is there a simpler way to do it? Is there, is this going to take up all your time? You want them to start thinking about those things. But at the same time, what projects are just the coolest things? Sometimes these kids just do some stuff that's just neat, and they really want that particular thing to get done. So let them finish it. This is not decision time for you. This is decision time for them. But you need to kind of raise the flag and go, okay, boys and girls, we have 4 weeks left. So even if we met 4 days a week, this is how much time we have. So let's figure out how much do we really need to accomplish before we get to the tournament. And analyze that. That prioritization is going to really make a difference. The other thing that you can do, especially as you're going into your regional tournaments, is, look, guys, let's get what we can get done. And, if we are fortunate and we place well and we get to go to the state tournament, well, there we go. We've got 4, 5, 6 weeks more that we can do some of this stuff. So, let's maybe take this and table it onto a side list of all the things that we want to do. I know I've had teams do that where they'll start a list and they go, all right, we want to do this if we have time, and this if we have time, and this if we have time. And if they get to that regional tournament and they're kind of ready and they got, there's a couple projects they want to chew on, then they can start pulling things off that list. If they qualify for state, then they can start chewing on things. If they qualify for globals, they can chew on some other things on that list. I will tell you this, the list never gets finished, ever. You could go to, the Universal tournament on Mars, a year from now, and you'd still have the list, and it would still have things on it that they wanted to do, because that's just the nature of what these teams do. They always come up with great new ideas or different ways to do it, lots of stuff like that. So, kind of keep that piece of it moving along for sure. So you've prioritized, you're moving through, you're getting close now, what do you do those last couple weeks? And we'll talk a lot more about this in the next training, but that's going to really focus more around, paperwork, different things like that, all the stuff that you got to make sure you got to get done when you get there. But a couple of things that you want to make sure you're doing as you're moving through January is take some time and maybe just reread the guide yourself, reread your challenge, and just make sure they haven't missed something, and have them glance over it one more time. Sometimes you'll get going down roads where you'll just forget that you needed to do A and you went and did B. Don't get to the tournament and realize that you went the wrong way on something, because it happens. It's happened I've had teams that have done this for 4 or 5 years and have made, egregious errors and literally have had to rip their solution apart at the check-in at the tournament because something was wrong, because they just didn't stop and think about what they were doing. So just, have everybody take a quick glance through it. The other thing that you want to make sure you're doing is within your central challenge is you want to think about your initial setup. So when they launch, you want to make sure that they're able to use the full 8 minutes or 6 minutes or whatever it is that your challenge is giving. So help them sort of think through that. How do you guys want to set this stuff up? Where do you want to go? Who's in charge of moving what? Where are you going to set that up in the launch area? Is that going first? Well, okay, so that's going first. Great. So then what goes next? And then have them think through that. So they're sort of practicing the starts as they go. That's important. And have them sort of think about the movements, the prop movements, the scene changes. When scene 1 ends, where do you want to put everything? So that they practice. Because, sometimes if you set something up over on the left, but then in 2 scenes you're going to need it way over on the right, and then one of the kids has to run 20 feet, grab it, run back, then you kind of, it just sort of breaks the flow. Set them up for success by having them think about that stuff ahead of time. Where do you want to be? How do you want to do this? Is that where you want to stand when you're done? Perfect. That's great. Love it. Oh, you don't? Well, why don't you want to stand there? Oh, you want to go over there? Okay, great. Do whatever you need to do. And that'll help kind of work you into the timing so that they have a sense of, we're either running really, really long or we're running really, really short. We're going to have plenty of time. Great. If you're running right at the 8 minutes, okay, just know that you're running right at 8 minutes, and you guys aren't going to have a lot of time to dilly-dally. You're going to have to make sure you get this stuff done. If you're running at 12 minutes, then you probably ought to have the team think about that. Okay, we're obviously really, really long. What do we need to cut out? What do we need to consolidate so that we can get it in at 8 minutes? Because you want them to finish. Because usually the end's kind of fun. So that's definitely one thing you want to do. Don't forget about Instant Challenge. It's very easy to forget about this time of year because you're doing all this other stuff. You're building, you're going crazy, doing all this stuff, super nuts. But don't forget about it. Spend a little time on it here and then as you can, even if it's just a quick, one Instant Challenge a week that you come in. All right, we're going to kick it off. Instant Challenge. Boom, 6-7 minutes. Let's go. Get it done, and now let's get to work. That's good too because it keeps the skills, keeps them up to snuff. And then practice like you play. As you get close to the tournament, like probably those last couple of weeks, make sure that they're doing their skit, they're moving their props, they're kind of doing it like they would do it at the tournament. So when they get to the tournament, they're comfortable with it. They know what they're doing a little bit more. It just makes it smoother and easier if they don't have to worry about who's got what prop, who's moving where. That'll be good. It'll help them out a lot. It just makes it more fun for them to do the performance so they can focus on the performance rather than all the tactical stuff that's going on. So definitely kind of have them prepare that stuff as they go. And lastly, just hang in there. You're going to run into tough things in the next couple of weeks. Something will come, something will break, somebody won't show up. Please don't forget that this is fun. It really is. The most experienced team managers get frustrated. The most experienced teams get frustrated. But just keep in mind that the stress makes you smarter. It makes you stronger. It makes you better. When you look back on it, if you're having fun during those stressful times and you're not screaming at each other, then it becomes a positive thing. And the kids start to realize that, just because it's stressful doesn't mean it's not something that we can't do. Stress isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just something that happens. Things break. Things don't work. Run out of time. Whatever. So let's figure it out and let's move on. We're going to do the best we can. That's all that we can do as a team is we can do the best we can. And be the cheerleader. You may not feel like being the cheerleader every time, but make sure you are. Make sure that you are excited about whatever's going on and that you're not sitting there going, well, we didn't get that done. Hey, look what we did get done. All right. Hey, you know what? Look what we got. We got it done. What are you going to do? Let's go with this. This works. Great. You know what I mean? So definitely kind of keep that in mind as you're going through these things, is staying positive, staying with this, keep them moving forward and making sure that they realize that, they're going to get there. Whatever there is, they're going to get there. The tournament's going to come. They're going to be there. They're going to perform. They're going to be proud of what they did. The people who are there to see them are going to be proud of what they did. And then the chips will fall where they fall from there. You cannot worry about what other teams do. You cannot worry about what the appraisers are going to do. You can only worry about what you do. And you do the best you can. And then you move on. And so I think if they kind of keep that sort of healthy attitude and then sort of drive to their solution, you make it as easy for them as possible to get to where they're trying to go. That's your job. They're going to have to get themselves there. But you can definitely clear the path so that they can get there as quickly as possible and get as much of this stuff done as they possibly can. So, questions? Anybody? And I did see something came across on the chat. Dick, I don't know, does that show up for everybody to see? That Nikki was good enough to post
Nikki's link, and I also put it as an answer to a question in the line. And I'm also going to send out an email with the link and then also a link to where they can get the recordings of all these webinars. I'm going to email that out to all the registrants.
Gotcha.
Because I just went and took a look at those. I went and took a look at those two links that Nikki sent, and they look really good.
Awesome.
And then we do have a couple of questions, and they seem to deal a lot with interference. they said supervision and help is good, but the parents end up going in and helping a bit. And the card,
So
like they say, the cardboard was too hard for them to cut. They are just kids, isn't what they say? Now, is it interference?
it absolutely, so it absolutely is interference. So even if you're dealing with just a piece of cardboard, um, and I had this happen on my very first year, my very first tournament, where our kids had been doing some cutting with a table saw, and myself and my assistant manager thought it was just really dangerous, and so we had our hands on it and we helped them do it. And when we got to the tournament, they asked questions and the kids told them, and we got a pretty big deduction for it. And afterwards, it was like, well, what are we supposed to do? It wasn't safe. And, the answer that I got, and I believe this strongly, is that if whatever you're trying to do is beyond the reach of the kids' skills or safety or abilities, then find some other way to do it. So if you're not confident with your kids using a saw, a chop saw or a table saw, or then find a different material that doesn't require them to use that particular tool. If they're not able to cut that piece of cardboard, then have somebody else on the team do it who is, or find a different material to use. Maybe a thinner piece of cardboard, maybe a different tool to cut it. There are different ways to accomplish all these tasks, and that's part of the challenge is to get to that end state using the materials, the tools, and the skills that you have at your disposal. And so, that's a tough one, but that's a pretty strict one. If the kids can't do it, then either teach them how to do it or do something else.
Okay, here's another question. This is really sort of interesting. It says, how can we ensure there is no interference when they do it by themselves? I think she's referring to the team members are doing something at home by themselves.
Yep. It's that's a great question. You cannot insure it 100%. You can never insure it 100%. But if you do send them home, and hopefully you have been sort of telling your parents this message all along about interference and explaining it to them. If you haven't, you definitely should with an email and kind of, honestly share the pieces from the rules of the road that talk about interference and have your parents read it, but have them understand that this has to be them. And you know what? When it comes back, if it doesn't look right to you, if it smells wrong, ask them, hey, did you do this or did you have help? And if they say, no, I did it all, then you have to trust that kid that he did it or she did it. It's kind of just like at a tournament. I've heard this 100 times where some team is watching another team and they go, oh, there's no way those kids did that. That didn't happen. You know what? But those kids are going to talk to those appraisers, and those appraisers are going to ask questions about it. And if those kids know what they're doing and they know how to explain it, and the appraisers believe that they did it, then they did it. And that's kind of the way you have to operate here. So you have to be careful when you send people outside of your purview like that. It's a very good question. But just make sure you're explaining it to the parents or wherever they're going, and just reinforce that has to be them. It has to be their hands on it. It has to be their work, whether you think it looks good or whether you think it looks bad. Now, it's okay to sit there and just check in and go, you're doing it the way you can do it, right? You're doing the best job you can do, right? And make sure you spend some time, make sure you take your time, make sure you do it, carefully. That's okay to do, but you're not doing the cutting, you're not doing the pasting, you're not doing the drawing, whatever it is, and you're not telling them, well, that doesn't look good enough. You should probably redo that. That's interference all the way around. So it's something to make sure you spend some extra time on, spend some extra focus on it for sure. But at the end of the day, you have to trust your team. You have to trust your kids that they're going to do the work.
Okay. And we have one last question. It has to deal with Rising Star teams. Will Rising Star teams be asked to do an instant challenge the day of the tournament?
Great question. Yes, they do, but it's different than what the other teams will do. So for the non-rising star teams, they go into a room, appraisers are there, challenge is there, they get the challenge, they do it. It's very strict, you know, kind of straightforward from that standpoint. For the rising star kids, they get to do an instant challenge after they do their central challenge, and it's much more interactive. Obviously, with the rising star teams, the interference rules are different. I always encourage rising star managers to try to interfere as little as possible, but obviously with the little kids, the interference rules are more lax, and you can involve a little bit more than what you're doing. But we like the kids to get used to doing things themselves and not having hands all over everything. But yeah, they do an instant challenge after their central challenge, and they'll do it in front of all the parents, and everybody gets to do it there. And the appraisers are typically going to be engaged in talking them through it and all of that stuff. So it's not, here's your challenge, get to work, go, and they have to do it. It's more, here's what we're going to do, and that type of thing.
Okay, here's another question. If the wood piece was cut by a staff of sawdust store and counted as was a sawdust store and counted as cost for the service, does it count as interference or is it okay?
So I'm assuming we're talking about, we've got a piece of plywood that we bought at Home Depot, and we had the guy at Home Depot rip it into pieces for us, where they're cutting it into longer pieces. That is absolutely allowed. I know sometimes they will charge for that. And honestly, Dick, I don't know if I've ever had anybody ask whether they'd have to count the cost of the cutting into it. I don't believe you would. In the same way that if you had to rent a tool to do some work, you wouldn't have to count the cost of renting the tool into your final solution, because what's going into the final solution is the materials.
Correct.
Versus the labor. So it would be my assumption that if you were at Home Depot and they charged you 50 cents a cut on a piece of wood, you wouldn't have to count that to the cost. You just have to count the cost of whatever the wood is that you used in the solution.
That's
and that is definitely not interference. That's actually addressed in the rules of the road. As long as it's standard cuts that they would do for anybody there, it is not interference. Especially, when you've got kids trying to, cut big pieces of plywood or whatever. I mean, that's tough for anybody to do, but really tough for little kids to do. And probably, that's one of those things where it's a standard service that they offer there, and it's allowed in the rules of the road. Where you cannot have it do is where if you've got like some real custom template or something, you need like a jig cut out or something. If that's what you're doing, the kids have to do that.
Okay. And here's another question. This relates to my co-team manager. If I find that I work hard to get the group to listen to an idea of a girl who is very timid, age 10, she wanted to have a commercial, and it was immediately struck down. I advocated for them listening to her idea. Again, struck down when she did it again. And finally I said, well, let's time it and see if there might be time for a commercial. It's the other co-leader mom that sometimes sides with them. Or the time when I tried to set up sewing class and she said, no, my daughter will learn on YouTube. Any advice? Do you want me to put her on?
No, you know what? I mean, I totally get where we're going here. I mean, you can definitely bring her up, but I think this is something I think that this is the greatest challenge of this whole thing, is managing the relationships, and it's not just the relationships of the kids, it's the relationships of the managers too. I think, and I don't know, how much this has become a problem, but I think two things to keep in mind. One thing is that you want to make sure that the conflict or the friction that's going on between you and the other team manager does not get played out in front of those kids. So you definitely owe it to the kids to have a conversation with her offline, away from the meeting, not before the meeting, not after the meeting. When there's no other kids around, you guys need to hack that out. And you need to kind of come to an agreement of what's going on there. And I think that the other mom needs to understand if you guys are true co-managers, then you need to kind of come to a compromise. If that's just a mom that's helping, then you need to probably be a little bit more like, look, this is how the team's running. So that's kind of the first issue I hear there. But I think that's definitely a conversation that needs to be had, because what you don't want to have happen is that you go one direction in front of the kids and then the other mom comes and cuts your knees out from underneath you, and then the kids are like, what the heck are we doing here? I don't understand. The other thing that you've got there, and you've got to be careful about this, is that you don't want to imprint your thoughts or your philosophy on what the team wants to do, because even though you have a shy and timid kid there and you want to encourage their thoughts and their things, you also need to help that kid understand that just because you have come up with an idea, which we love that you have done, it doesn't always mean that your idea is going to get taken. So it sounds like you've been advocating for things and the kids sort of went another direction. Without being in the room when it happened, don't know for sure, but the kids are going to do what the kids are going to do at the end of the day. I mean, it is typically it is a majority rule. You got to be careful that they don't domineer over somebody, but at the same time, you don't want to force feed the idea of a timid child just because they came up with the idea. You have to help them understand, and the way that I've always explained this to my kids is that when you come up with an idea and that idea comes out of your mouth, you have just given the team a gift. It's not yours anymore. It belongs to the team. It's just like when you go to a birthday party and you give somebody a gift. They're going to do whatever they want to do with that gift because it now belongs to them. And the team now owns that thought, that idea. They may take a little piece of it. They may take all of it. They may take none of it. You can't invest your ego into that idea. You have to generously give those ideas to the team to make the team better. And so, that's kind of a tough concept for some kids because, we all have ego. It hurts when somebody doesn't like what we say. But you have to help them kind of understand that. So it's very difficult with these shy ones because you are kind of talking out of both sides of your mouth. It's like, hey, talk because we need your ideas, but then sometimes your ideas are going to come out and nobody's going to want them, and that's okay too. So, you have to be very gentle, and I think it sounds like you're doing the right things there with encouraging the team to spend a little time and focus on an idea. Just because the person who said it probably said it quietly and didn't say it with a lot of conviction doesn't mean it's not a good idea. But then on the back end of that, you got to make sure that you're not forcing the team into trying to do something just because it came from somebody who's typically shy. So, balancing act, one of the hats you got to wear as a team manager for sure. But definitely make sure that you keep encouraging that. Just be careful, gray area there, to not drive the idea, into the team and force it upon them.
Okay. And we have one last question. It has to do with do we add the rent of costumes to the expenses?
Renting a costume. Yes, there is a provision in the rules of the road around expense reports, and I would encourage you to kind of read through them because it is very helpful. There's something called one-day rental in there, and that's typically going to be reserved for things that you wouldn't necessarily buy that you could rent. I guess costumes would. Dick, I would say costumes would fall into that if you're going to rent a costume.
Yes.
But I mean, what I would say, my initial response to that is, depending on what the costume is, I would ask the team first before you go rent it, is there a way to make it? And I would encourage them to build it or make it or create it rather than rent it if it's at all possible. And I have no idea what your costume is. I don't know what it's doing. I don't know how involved it is, but I would, as personally, would rather see a team with a, on a scale of 1 to 10, a costume that's a 3 that they built versus a costume that's an 8 that they rented. But I don't know the solution. I don't know your team, so that is just a general statement. But if you do rent a costume, yeah, you do have to count the cost of the rental into your budget. Now, if you have to rent it for a week, you don't have to count the cost of renting it for a week. If somebody's charging you, $70 and you have to rent it for a week, then put down $10 because it's a 1 day. It's whatever it costs to rent it for the day. There is that provision that you can do 1 day rental.
Someone else brought up an interesting comment here and a question about would renting a costume, could that end up being a deduction points? I'm thinking of, I don't know. Well, I'm not quite sure where because it all depends.
Well, and it would totally depend on what the costume's doing.
Yeah.
If it's going towards a directly scored component of your challenge, then you probably would get a 0. If you just went out and rented a solution, maybe not a 0, but I know, in everybody's challenge, it does say that, the appraisers encourage custom-built solutions, not rented or bought solutions. It doesn't say, that's not verbatim, I don't know exactly what it says, but basically what it says is if 2 teams have identical solutions and one of them built it from scratch and one of them used store-bought components, the team that built it from scratch is going to score better than the one with store-bought components. That's the idea of this program, is figure out how to do it yourself. That doesn't mean you can't use concepts, you can't use things that are reapplied from other functionalities, different kinds of costumes, that type of thing. It doesn't mean you can't learn a technique or an idea and then apply it to your own thing, but they're going to be strongly encouraged not to rent things. So if you are renting something to basically solve the problem, that's not going to score very well. I wouldn't, I'm not an appraiser and I've never been an appraiser. I've seen a lot of teams get appraised, but I've never been one. But I would say, yeah, that would, I've seen teams get some pretty low scores on stuff that was not really of their own building or creation.
And I've been an appraiser many times, and that's very true.
Yeah. So push them a little bit if you can to figure it out. There's ways to do everything. Don't always take the easiest way out if you can't. So.
And then the last question we have is, how do you handle a situation where a child throws out an idea that takes the team totally off task without interfering or stifling creativity?
You're scribing things. So let's say you're working on, you've got a giraffe in your skit, and you're trying to figure out how to build a giraffe costume. And then all of a sudden somebody comes up with, oh, but the king, we should put a king in this thing. Oh, hold on. So then what I would do in that situation, if I'm the team manager, I go, I love it. King, that's cool. Hold on a minute. And you take one of your pieces of paper that you've got and you write king down on the wall. And you say, we're coming back to that. That's awesome. Let's finish what we're doing first. And you tell that person, hey, Bobby, don't lose that thought. Think about it for a minute. Keep it in your head because we're coming back to it. I love it. I love it. And, go on. And then you get back to the draft. All right, so what are we doing with this draft? What were we saying? Susie, what did you say? Okay, so you're writing that down. All right, so you like that. So what do you think about that? This back. Okay, done. You're done with the draft. Okay, now let's get back to this king idea. All right, tell me about it. And then you write it down. Okay, what does everybody think about it? And then you kind of go from there. So you keep the energy going. You don't just say, look, we're talking about the draft right now, doggone it. Be quiet. Of course not. You're just like, hey, ooh, new idea. We love new ideas around here. Let's write it down and let's get back to it. But we got to finish this first. So you can take charge in that. That is not interfering. That is the process. You are working through a process with them. Help them stay on task. Help them stay focused. It would be just like if they started talking about some video game they were playing in the middle of practice. You would be like, well, hold on a minute. Let's finish up with this. You guys can talk about that later. Same thing. It's just in a little bit different order.
Okay, that is the end of the questions.
Okay. And that's the end of the time, too, I think. So,
yes, it is.
How about that? Oh, 1 minute over. So, very good. Well, I thank everybody for taking the time. I know it's always a little tough getting back from the holidays and getting up to speed. Just jump back into it. Make sure you're having some fun with these kids. Get everything that you can get done, and what you don't get done, you don't get done. That's not the end of the world. You know, like I said, this is not life. This is not death. This is DI. It feels like life and death sometimes, but it isn't. It's just DI. Have fun, be silly, and enjoy. So with that, I thank you much, and have a good evening.